The United States and Canada's relationship is like a delicately balanced ecosystem. Both nations depend on one another for jobs, resources, and economic stability. However, recent disputes over trade policies and energy exports have made this partnership into a high-stakes game of chess. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel with the bell notification turned on for more updates. Let's get into the specifics of this intricate drama, breaking it down into simple terms to understand how it affects everyday lives. From the price of gasoline to the stability of the power grid, Canada is the biggest supplier of electricity to the U.S., making up almost all of our imports. Although this may seem insignificant on a national level, these imports account for only 1% to 2% of the US's overall electricity consumption, not 8%. Some states rely significantly on Canadian electricity to power their lights. For instance, New York imports roughly 25% of its electricity from hydropower produced in Ontario and Quebec. Additionally, states like Michigan and Minnesota rely heavily on Manitoba. Hydro provides 90% of Minnesota's electricity imports. Although 95% of Michigan's electricity imports come from Ontario, this electricity powers factories, hospitals, and public transit systems. If Canada were to cut back on exports, the state would. During severe weather events like heat waves or polar vortices, states like New York may experience power outages or increased electricity prices as demand for electricity rises. According to energy experts, electricity prices in these areas may increase dramatically, raising expenses for both homes and businesses. Therefore, why would Canada think about restricting exports of electricity? It's not random. Rather, it's a calculated reaction to U.S. trade policies that have affected Canadian industries. For instance, in 2023, the U.S. placed a 10% tariff on Canadian aluminum, claiming that doing so was required to safeguard American jobs. While electricity makes headlines, Canada indicated that it could use its energy exports as leverage in trade talks, highlighting how closely the two economies are linked. The core of this energy conflict is oil. Canada is America's largest foreign oil supplier, accounting for over 50% of all U.S. crude oil imports. The U.S. imports roughly 3.8 million barrels of oil per day from Canada, enough to fill 240 Olympic-sized swimming pools. This oil is transported to refineries in states like Michigan, Illinois, and Texas via major pipelines like the Keystone Pipeline System, which has been the subject of protests and legal disputes, and Enbridge Line 5, which runs beneath the Great Lakes. If Canada restricted oil exports, the ripple effects would be immediate. According to GasBuddy analysts, if supply chain disruptions occur, gas prices could increase by $51 per gallon, which would add an additional $50 to $100 per trip for a truck driver filling a 100-gallon tank. Additionally, manufacturers and shipping firms would have to deal with increased expenses, which could result in more costly consumer goods, delayed deliveries, and more expensive airline tickets. This isn't merely hypothetical. In 2023, Albertan wildfires forced short-term suspensions of Canadian oil production. The 12% increase in gas prices within a week has no clear source, but the extent of the spike varied by region, and shortages in states like Wisconsin were more caused by local supply chain disruptions than by a direct Canadian oil shortage. This incident demonstrated the vulnerability of the energy supply chain and the speed at which disruptions can affect day-to-day living. The United States and Canada have been trading partners for more than 150 years, but recent policies such as America First and B'American have strained their relationship. Let's examine two major flashpoints in 2018. Citing national security concerns, the U.S. levied a 10% tariff on aluminum and a 25% tariff on Canadian steel. In retaliation, Canada imposed tariffs on 12.6 billion U.S. goods, such as lawnmowers and bourbon ketchup, which were later removed in 2019. Industrial policy tensions persist, particularly as both nations strive for domestic production. The United States Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 provides tax credits for EVs manufactured in America. Canada contends that this unjustly leaves out its automakers, such as Ford and GM, who have plants in Ontario that provide parts for our assembled vehicles. These policies have practical repercussions, such as a Michigan factory using Canadian steel, and this dispute threatens to upend North American supply chains and cooperation on clean energy goals. May see an increase in production costs that results in layoffs. Similarly, a Canadian farmer who purchases US-made tractors may raise food prices to offset costs. The annoyance on social media is evident. Hashtags such as Canada and #TradeWar, the US feud. Small business owners frequently share tales of supply chain chaos on Trend. One owner of an Ontario bakery tweeted, "Why are we taxing each other's flow? Everyone is harmed by this." The US and Canada are not only neighbors, but also business partners with intricately linked economies. Automobiles are manufactured across borders. The engine of a Ford F-150 pickup truck may be produced in Ohio. Every year, more than $100 billion worth of auto parts, from final assembly in Michigan to transmission in Ontario, cross the border, supporting more than 1 million jobs in both nations. About 14% of America's uranium for nuclear power and 76% of its cobalt imports for EV batteries come from Canada. Canadian hydropower is also essential for U.S. states making the switch to renewable energy. In exchange, the US purchases $25 billion worth of Canadian agricultural goods each year, such as wheat, pork, and maple syrup. Over $20 billion worth of US produce, including fruits and vegetables, are imported by Canada. This interdependence poses risks in 2021. Freeze in Texas. How this impacts your wallet. Trade disputes and energy shortages don't stay in boardrooms. They trickle down to kitchen tables and gas stations. Canada increased natural gas exports to help Americans stay warm. But if political tensions increase, such cooperation could become uncertain, leaving both nations vulnerable. Here are some ways that consumers will pay more for energy if Canadian utilities become more scarce. In 2022, a hydropower shortage increased the cost of electricity. According to some estimates, the cost of gas and oil supplies in New York would increase by an additional $1.2 billion or $100 per household. Cuts could raise gas prices to $5 per gallon from the current average of about $350, which would be an additional $50 to $75 per month for a family that drives 3,000 miles per month. Steel-related goods tariffs increase the cost of automobile appliances, even soda cans. According to a 2023 study by the Peterson Institute, US-Canada, tariffs reduce the average American household's disposable income for groceries by hundreds of dollars annually. Savings or vacations could make matters worse. Politics will determine the answer. Although US President Joe Biden and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have made public statements about their close relationship, tensions still exist beneath the surface, and two significant issues could intensify the conflict. 5 pipeline disputes. The goal of Michigan is to close Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline, which runs the pipeline, which supplies important refineries in Michigan with 540,000 barrels of crude oil and natural gas liquids daily, is subject to environmental risks under the Straits of Mackinac. Pennsylvania and Ohio, Canada views this as a red line, claiming that the closure would be against the Transit Pipelines Treaty of 1977, which ensures constant energy flow between the two nations. 11 million Americans living in these states may experience a shortage of propane for home heating, and fuel prices may rise as a result of decreased. Due to the ongoing legal battles between the federal and state governments, the US and Canada are vying for control of the EV battery supply chain, which is dependent on vital minerals like nickel, cobalt, and lithium. We have less access to these resources because Canada, which has some of the biggest undeveloped reserves in the world, recently tightened restrictions on foreign investment in its mining industry. The move has infuriated us automakers who depend on cross-supply chains, even though it is intended to guarantee that Canadian minerals benefit domestic industries first. This competition could impede EV production and postpone North America's shift to clean energy at a time when both countries are pursuing ambitious climate goals. Former US diplomat Sarah Goldfager cautions that this isn't just about energy but also about who will control jobs and technology in the future, and how to clean up the mess as tensions rise. If both countries put cooperation above conflict, there will be solutions for growing renewable energy. Partnerships. Both nations are interested in increasing clean energy and lowering their reliance on fossil fuels. Infrastructure. If both governments jointly invested in cross-wind solar and hydro projects, they could establish a dependable low-carbon energy corridor that would benefit both parties. Currently, Canada exports 60 TWh of electricity to the US each year, primarily from hydropower. For example, Canada's abundant hydropower resources could be crucial in assisting the US in reaching its goal of having 100% clean electricity by 2035. The US-Canada trade relationship has been tainted by retaliatory tariffs on steel and aluminum. Dairy and lumber products renegotiated trade terms, and a 5-year moratorium on new tariffs could provide much-needed stability for businesses to plan. Investments and increased hiring would be especially beneficial to industries that depend on integrated supply chains, like construction, automotive manufacturing, and agriculture. One of the main issues in trade disputes is unfair competition, which can be brought on by subsidized industries or issues with labor and environmental standards. Putting blockchain tracking systems into place could increase openness. In addition to lowering claims of dumping low-quality goods, enabling customers and companies to track raw materials from mine to factory to market would guarantee that supply chain agreements benefit both nations equally. Modernizing cross-border infrastructure. Older power grids and pipelines present environmental and financial risks. Rather than closing vital infrastructure, such as Line 5, both countries could cooperate to modernize and upgrade it. For instance, Michigan has suggested replacing Line 5 with a tunnel beneath the Great Lakes that would prevent oil spills while preserving energy security. To ensure a stable, climate-resilient power grid, comparable improvements could be made to electrical transmission lines. The United States and Canada resemble a long-term partnership. Disagreements exist, but splitting up is not an option. Their citizens and economies are too intertwined and dependent on one another for significant divisions, trade tensions, and energy disputes. While headlines may be dominated, the true way forward is through mutual cooperation. For instance, during the COVID-19 pandemic, both countries maintained supply chains for medical goods, demonstrating their ability to cooperate in times of crisis. Similarly, joint investments in clean energy infrastructure could not only lower emissions and generate jobs, but also improve their standing in the global economy, rather than battling over scarce resources. As climate change intensifies and global competition increases, the US and Canada must decide whether to fight for the last piece of the pie or work together to bake a bigger one. The answer will shape not only their economic futures but also the stability of North America's energy and trade landscape. Do you think that tight negotiations are the only option, or should the US and Canada work together to expand markets so that both countries benefit in the long run? Post your opinions in the comments section. In a bold move that has stunned global markets and geopolitical analysts alike, Canada has announced a sweeping decision to cut off oil and power exports to the United States. This decision comes amidst a growing shift towards electric vehicles, escalating trade tensions, and a push for energy independence. Today, we delve into the implications of Canada's decision and its ripple effects across economies and global politics. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into a seismic shift in North American relations. Canada, historically the United States' largest supplier of oil and electricity, has decided to close the taps. What does this mean for both countries, and why now? Canada's decision to cut off oil and power to the US is a strategic move driven by several factors. Firstly, the global push towards reducing carbon emissions has accelerated the shift towards electric vehicles, diminishing the demand for traditional oil exports. Secondly, tensions over trade policies, exacerbated by previous administrations, have strained bilateral relations. With the rise of electric vehicles, traditional oil-dependent economies are facing an existential reckoning. Canada's pivot reflects a broader trend towards renewable energy and decarbonization. But what about the economic impact? How will this decision affect the US economy? Energy expert says that the immediate impact on the US economy could be significant, with potential disruptions in oil supply chains and energy prices. However, this move could also catalyze domestic energy innovation and bolster renewable energy investments. Historically, Canada and the US have maintained a complex economic interdependence, marked by extensive trade agreements and shared energy resources. However, geopolitical shifts and climate imperatives are reshaping this relationship. Internationally, Canada's decision has sparked varied reactions. While some applaud the environmental commitment, others speculate on the broader implications for global energy markets and diplomatic relations. As we navigate this new chapter in North American relations, one thing is clear. The transition towards sustainable energy is not just a national imperative, but a global necessity. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the evolving dynamics of energy, trade, and diplomacy. Breaking news that could reshape North America as we know it. Canada, the United States' largest supplier of oil and electricity, has just made a game-changing decision, cutting off oil and power exports to its southern neighbor. This move has sent shockwaves through global energy markets, leaving many wondering, why would Canada make such a drastic move? How will this impact America's economy and energy security? And most importantly, what's next? If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because today, we're breaking down one of the biggest geopolitical and economic shifts of the decade. Canada has just pulled the plug on its oil and electricity exports to the US, and the consequences could be massive. So why did Canada do this? There are three key reasons behind this historic decision: energy transition, trade, tensions, and political shifts. The world is moving away from fossil fuels, and Canada is no exception. The rise of electric vehicles, solar and wind power is changing how countries view their energy exports. In Canada, over 75% of electricity already comes from renewable sources, while the US still heavily depends on fossil fuels. Canada sees the writing on the wall. With global commitments to cut carbon emissions, investing in oil exports could become a risky long-term strategy. Instead, Canada is looking to position itself as a leader in clean energy. This isn't just about clean energy. Trade tensions have been brewing for years. Remember when the US canceled the Keystone XL pipeline? That was a major hit to Canada's energy sector. Now Canada is pushing back, refusing to be a mere resource supplier to the US. It's time for Canada to take control of its energy destiny. No more being treated as an afterthought in US energy policy. This is a disaster, folks. Canada has always been a great energy partner. Now, they're playing games, and believe me, we're not going to take it. Donald Trump, along with other US politicians, has expressed outrage over Canada's decision. But let's not forget, this isn't just about North America. The global energy landscape is shifting, and Canada wants a seat at the table with European and Asian markets instead of being solely reliant on US buyers. So what does this mean for the United States? Well, it's not looking good. Canada supplies about 50% of US crude oil imports and nearly 20% of the country's electricity. Without this flow of energy, the US could face serious problems, including the sudden drop in supply could lead to a spike in fuel costs, affecting everything from transportation to food prices. Some US states heavily depend on Canadian hydropower, meaning potential blackouts and increased reliance on fossil fuels. US refineries that process Canadian crude could see major layoffs, impacting thousands of workers. Man, gas is already expensive. Now Canada's cutting us off? This is insane. With the US facing an energy crunch, how will Washington react? Here are 3 likely scenarios. The US could tap into its strategic petroleum reserves, but that's only a short-term fix. Expect more pressure to ramp up US drilling despite environmental concerns. The US may look to alternative suppliers like Mexico, Venezuela, or even OPEC nations. This is going to force the US to rethink its entire energy policy. Do we double down on oil, or do we accelerate the transition to renewable energy? Beyond North America, the effects of this decision will ripple across the globe. Countries like China and the EU, which are also reducing their fossil fuel dependence, might look to Canada for clean energy partnerships. Meanwhile, oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia and Russia could see a shift in demand. If Canada strengthens its energy ties with Europe and Asia, the US could find itself sidelined in the global energy market. That's a major geopolitical shift. So what does all this mean for you, the everyday person? Here's what you should keep an eye on. Expect higher gas prices in the short term. Watch for new US energy policies. Could this push for more domestic production? The rise of electric vehicles is accelerating. If you haven't considered switching, now might be the time. His is a massive story that's only just beginning. What do you think about Canada's decision? Will this push the US to move towards renewable energy faster, or will it create new trade tensions? Drop a comment below, and let's get the discussion going. The energy crisis caused by Canada cutting off oil and power exports to the US could have major implications for the automotive trade, given that both countries are deeply connected through vehicle manufacturing, exports, and supply chains. Let's break down how this decision could disrupt the North American car industry. The US and Canada have one of the most tightly integrated automotive industries in the world. Here's why. Canada is one of the largest exporters of vehicles to the US. The US supplies Canada with key car parts, raw materials, and components. Cross-border supply chains mean cars and parts cross the border multiple times before final assembly. Canada produces vehicles for global brands like Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, Chrysler, Honda, and Toyota, and most of these vehicles are exported straight to the US. In return, the US supplies engines, steel, aluminum, and semiconductors for vehicles manufactured in Canada. In 2023, Canada exported over 1.5 million vehicles to the US, valued at more than $42 billion. But with Canada cutting off oil and electricity, will this automotive relationship be affected? Let's take a look. If Canada stops sending oil and electricity to the US, here's how it could impact the automotive supply chain. US manufacturers rely on Canadian oil for gasoline, diesel, and plastics used in car interiors, dashboards, and bumpers. Higher fuel prices will increase the cost of transporting parts and finished vehicles across the border. Many auto plants in Michigan, New York, and Ohio rely on Canadian electricity. If those power supplies are disrupted, production slowdowns and even temporary shutdowns could follow. This could delay car deliveries and create inventory shortages, leading to higher prices for new vehicles. If Canada is moving away from fossil fuels, this could accelerate the shift to electric vehicles, EVs, in both countries. But there are some big challenges. Canada is a key supplier of battery materials like nickel, lithium, and cobalt, which are crucial for electric vehicle production. If trade relations sour, the US could face shortages of these materials. EV charging infrastructure depends on electricity. If Canadian power is cut off, some US regions could face difficulties expanding their EV charging networks. However, this could push the US to invest more in domestic battery production, reducing dependence on Canadian resources. If you're in the market for a new or used car, here's what you should expect. New car prices could rise. If supply chain disruptions slow down vehicle production, expect higher prices for new cars. Gas-powered cars could get more expensive. Rising fuel costs and supply chain issues could make traditional gas-powered vehicles pricier. Used car prices might spike again. With fewer new cars being produced, demand for used cars could increase, pushing prices higher. More incentives for EVs. Governments might offer more subsidies to push consumers toward electric vehicles as a solution to energy problems. With energy supplies in jeopardy, the US and Canada could find themselves in an automotive trade dispute. Here's why. The US may impose new tariffs on Canadian cars to retaliate for the energy cutoff. Canada may shift its car exports to Europe or Asia, reducing supply to the US market. Both countries could push for more domestic car production, breaking their long-standing supply chain partnership. The result? Higher car prices, industry uncertainty, and possible job losses in both countries. Canada's decision to cut off oil and electricity isn't just about energy. It's a move that could shake up the entire car industry. Whether this accelerates the EV revolution or leads to a trade war remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. North America's automotive landscape is about to change in a big way. What do you think? Will this push the US to build more EVs, or will it lead to higher car prices and trade tensions? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The fallout from Canada's decision to stop oil and electricity exports to the US has sparked a massive public reaction across North America. From angry protests to shocking price hikes and heated political debates, let's break down how Americans, Canadians, and world leaders are responding. As soon as Canada halted oil exports, gasoline prices in the US surged overnight. In cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, long lines formed at gas stations, with frustrated drivers paying nearly $7–8 per gallon in some areas. My business runs on diesel, and now I'm paying almost double. If this keeps up, we'll have to shut down. This increase in transportation costs is pushing up food prices, leading to inflation concerns across America. Grocery stores are already raising prices on essential goods, and consumers are feeling the squeeze. At the end of the day, ordinary citizens are the ones feeling the biggest impact. While politicians argue and world leaders strategize, millions of Americans and Canadians are dealing with higher costs, power outages, and job losses. What do you think? Is Canada making the right move, or will this backfire? Will the US fight back with a trade war, or will both countries find a way to work together? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.